find it too.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Off the Shelf, a presentation by the Sisters in Crime Atlanta chapter, where our own Dawn Gepfer interviews author about her book and her path to writing, and hopefully bring books off the shelf and into the hands of readers. Today, our guest is Mariana Evans. She's an award-winning author and former or recently retired university professor with an engineering physics degree and a PhD in English literature. She has over 20 published works that include 2 series, 3 standalones, 2 nonfiction books, and a collection of short fiction and essays. She's been recognized by the Oklahoma Book Award, the Will Rogers Medallion Awards Gold Medal, the Mississippi Author Award, the Benjamin Franklin Award, and multiple awards from the state of Florida Book Awards. She's been included in the Voice of Young America's Adult Mysteries with Young Adult Appeal, and she had a writer's residency in the studios of Key West. When not writing, she enjoys reading, gardening, cooking, spending time with her family, and playing her 7.5-foot long monster of a piano. Dawn, take it away.
Thank you, Lance, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, just real quick, we would love for the audience to participate in this conversation we're about to have with Mariana. And by doing that, you can speak up, or you can raise your hand and we will call on you, or you can put your question or comment in the chat and we will make reference to that for you on your behalf. So please do engage with us as we go through this conversation. Mariana, welcome to Off the Shelf.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, you're very interesting. As Lance alluded to in your bio, there is a lot to unpack here about you and who you are as a writer, but also outside of being a writer. And so let's get started with the outside of being a writer. Let's go back to the beginning and tell us where you're from and about your childhood.
I grew up in Mississippi, in South Mississippi. I'm a 7th generation Mississippian on both sides, I believe. So long roots there, a lot of family. It was a beautiful place to be, very, slow moving, very warm. I went to Kentucky for my bachelor's degree and studied engineering physics at Murray State University, but I went back to Mississippi for my first master's in chemical engineering. So that's the Mississippi part. I haven't lived in Mississippi since I finished my graduate school, but I do still have family there.
So you first started out in the engineering realm. Right? And
Right.
So at some point you changed to literature, but tell us, before you changed to literature, what was happening in your life that eventually led you to switch to studying literature?
Well, I was always an avid reader, always a writer. One time I was speaking to the Institute for Learning and Retirement in my hometown. So a nice big crowd of retired people. And they asked me how long I had been a writer. And I'm at the mic trying to gather my thoughts and answer the question. And 2 hands in the audience go up of people who want to answer my question for me. So that I was in my hometown. So those 2 people were my mother and my 4th grade teacher who wanted to say that I had always been a writer. And so even in the physics program, I took an elective in Shakespeare, and in graduate school, I audited a writing course and a literature course just to kind of keep the right side of my brain from shriveling up, and so, but I always, I love science and engineering and the logic of it all and how the world works and the puzzle solving aspect. All of these things come into writing when you think about it. But also it's practical. I thought, well, I may need to put food on the table, and I did. Yeah, and there were times when I was a single mom, and I was really glad for those 2 degrees and the engineering license. And So my first job out of graduate school was teaching math and physics at a community college. So I've also always been a teacher. And then my second job was as an environmental consultant in Florida. I had moved to Florida for my husband's job during that time. And so I worked as an environmental consultant for quite a number of years, had some children, had the third one, and thought, you know, my life is kind of a critical mess. I need to drop back. And so I occasionally consulted, but basically was home with my children. And at the outset of that, while I was during my third pregnancy, I knew I was going to be on bed rest for the whole time. So I thought, well, I've been writing short stories and poetry and haiku. I mean, little bitty stuff, just things to keep the juices flowing. And so I said, well, I'll never be able to say I didn't have time to write a novel. So I started my first novel while I was on bed rest, and I took a correspondence course. And this was back in the days when those were on paper. Yeah.
And you had to mail them, right?
Mailed them. Yeah, I was in bed rest, so I would send the stuff for my husband to print. He would take it to the post office, and so I got 3/4 of the way through that book, and then I had the baby, and it took me 2 years to finish it. So, but that was the first novel. It got me an agent, and it got nibbles from Hollywood and nibbles from big publishers, but nobody bought it.
Oh.
So I was like, okay. And so in recent years, I have self-published that one because I've always believed in it. It's called Wounded Earth. So it's available paperback, audio, ebook. But anyway, so that gave me the chance to talk to my agent and go, so what now? And she said, well, if you got that close, you need to write another book. So I thought, easy for you to say, you know. But we're still together. She's been my agent now for more than 25 years. And so that book was the first Fate Longchamp mystery, and Poison Pen Press bought it. And so and my youngest was 7 at the time. And so,
wow.
yeah, it was a long process, but
Yeah.
that was the first of 13 Fate Longchamp books. I got about 6 books into the series, and she was graduating from high school, my last one. And so I said, well, this is my chance. If I would like to teach, so I could go back to graduate school and get the degree I need to be a college professor. So I moved to New Jersey and went to Rutgers Camden and got a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, which got me the job in Oklahoma. So that's how.
Wow. That is fascinating. You know, and you know, when you hear that someone is on the scientific side and there's a transition over to the fine art side, that's always an interesting juxtaposition to me. Like, you know, that like I was focused in this part and now I've switched over to this part. So I do love it when that happens, because sometimes people tend to get categorized into one or the other. And so it's I have one of the president of the company that I work for, he's like that. He's an engineer, but then he's this amazing marketer. Amazing marketer. So so it's kind of fun, you know, to see them tied together like that. So
Never get bored.
so you've had a really interesting career, and multiple careers if we think about it, because you started out, you know, teaching the sciences, math and sciences, and then you from out of passion pursued the literary side. And how many years were you teaching English or
Writing,
Yeah.
creative writing teacher. Actually, we specialized in creative writing for genre fiction, so it's a very unusual program. And I did that for 10 years. Got tenure, got interested in academic research, got funding to go to England to look at the archives, various archives related to Agatha Christie, which led to a PhD in English literature. And I wrote my dissertation on women and justice and the law in Agatha Christie's work. And it's a book based on that research is going to be published by Bloomsbury. I just signed the contract a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, so I did read that you do have the Bloomsbury Handbook to Agatha Christie. So that's not published yet?
No, that's a different book. That's out.
Oh,
Was
okay.
while I was in the PhD program, Bloomsbury asked me if I would like to edit this, the first, they called it the first compendium of current research on the work of Agatha Christie. And so they suggested I get a co-editor in England so that we could work on both sides of the Atlantic. And the very capable and brilliant J.C. Bernthal was my co-editor. And we put this thing together with some wonderful authors writing chapters. And we were nominated for an Edgar and a Agatha and a McCavity and an HRF Keating Award. So that was quite an experience to get to do that. And so now I'm going to get, we both had our own work in that book, but it was the group of us. So this will be my first sole authored book of Agatha Christie.
Well, congratulations. I actually went back to school not that long ago to study English with a focus on literature. And so I've started reading quite a bit of Agatha Christie. So I'm really enjoying this. And I did look up the book on Amazon, the first one, and it's in my cart. It's $40, and so I'm kind of sitting on it right now, wondering how I can sneak that in my next Amazon order without my husband saying, "What did you spend? What book other than a textbook did you spend $40 on?" So, but I
Well,
figure I can justify it.
it's
I can justify it as a textbook.
Yeah, I was very sheepish about the pricing of academic books. They're really priced for libraries. So the thing to do is ask your library to get it.
Oh yeah.
Because the hardcover was like $180. And I'm like, okay, now we know why libraries struggle. That's terrible. But the paperback is $40.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, you at some point along the way, so you had Wounded Earth, and that protagonist is an environmental scientist. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yes, there's a question on the chat that I don't want to forget.
Oh,
So I don't know why they're
oh,
showing those books not available as ebooks. They are available. So drop me an email and I will ask my publisher about that. Some of the print editions of the Fae books are hard to get, although they're not out of print. They're just slow. But the ebooks and the audiobooks should be Amazon UK. I don't know, but I can ask the question. I don't know about UK. But I still think the ebook should be available. So thank you for letting me know.
yeah. Linda, that's from Linda, and Linda joins us from across the pond.
That's
So,
wonderful. Hello.
yeah.
More than across the pond. I'm the other side on the Indian Ocean.
There you
Oh my
go.
goodness.
It's a big circle, so eventually we'll get to you, Linda. Over
Sorry
there.
to interrupt, but I just was
No.
writing it because I happened to look you up. And the other books are in KU, but they're missing 1 and 3. I can't even find 3, but 1 is there available as an audio and a paperback and a hardback and an MP3, but I can't find it as a Kindle.
That is not supposed to be the case. So I will let you know. So if my email is on my website, it's marianaevans@yahoo.com.
Okay.
Drop me an email and I will try to fix that for you.
All right.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
and what's interesting is it's out of sequence. It's
Yeah.
not like 1 and 2, it's 1 and 3. Like it's
And if anything's going to be available, it shouldn't be 1. Frequently they do sales on it to start the series. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your question.
Not at all. And I kind of forgot about the question. Oh, I was asking about Laura Beth McLeod, your protagonist in Wounded Earth.
Yes.
Yeah. So she is an environmental scientist. And you mentioned you were working in an environmental capacity at one time. And that's where this story jumped off from?
I was an environmental engineer working at a consulting firm. And that was the book I wrote while I was on bed rest. And that, the right witch thing was strong in my mind, so but she was not me. She did a different kind of environmental work. She was older than me, and far more business accomplished. She was a very good businesswoman with her own business, but I did understand the world that she lived in. And she had a daughter who was only roughly my age, a little younger than me. So yeah, that was the first one. You try to write what you know, because you're trying to get all the other skills pulled together. The Fay Longchamp books, I always had an amateur interest in archaeology, so I've never been an archaeologist, but I was still drawing on all those books I checked out of the bookmobile as a kid, and all the arrowheads I hunted with my mother when I read books.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because in reviewing your bio, as Lance had shared with us, the things that we learn about you in reading that is that you're a teacher, you like to read, you like to garden, you're a writer, you cook, you play the piano, and archaeology is not listed in there at all. So where does that come from? You mentioned your mom?
Yeah, I remember, when I was a kid, Mom would take us to the bookmobile in the summer, my sister and me, and we'd all get books that all three of us liked, so that we'd have a big haul to take home and share, and we'd pass them around. And so we got books about the pharaohs, we got books about, prehistoric American history. We just were interested in archaeology, and we did live in a place where spear points, arrow points, the debris from making those tools, and we think perhaps even a quarry, were all in the woods behind the house, plus the residue of people from the 20th century that had lived on that site, because our house had been built on the site of an old sawmill, which was on the site of an older house. So we sort of lived in an archaeological site, and so it was just an interest of ours. And so when I wrote Artifacts, when you're writing on spec, you're a little leery of going to people and taking up their time and asking them questions. So I did most of the research by books for that book, although there was some underwater archaeology I needed to know about. So I called somebody at Florida State and, made an appointment with him. And so I always, when I talk to younger or newer writers, I always tell them, people like to talk about what they do. It's, if you're respectful of their time and their expertise, they generally will talk to you, and then you've made a human connection, and you've learned something, and they've gotten to share what they know, and it's a positive experience. But I also understand when you're getting started that it's nervous making to do that. But so most of that was book research. And then when I was doing my first signing for Artifacts, I think it was one of my first, it was in Jackson, Mississippi, and I was seated at the table, and the first person in line was this very big, tall man carrying the book under his arm. And he says, "My name is Dr. Robert Connolly, and I'm the lead archaeologist at Poverty Point in Louisiana," which Poverty Point is now a World Heritage Site. And even then I knew it was a big deal, and he was a big deal. And I could see that the jacket was off the book, and I figured that he had read it and had come to enumerate my errors. And so I was like terrified. And then he just like handed me the book like he was passing a football. And he said, "I came to get you to sign my book and to tell you that you nailed the archaeology." And so I said, "Oh." And then he gave me his business card, and he said, "If you ever have any questions, just give me a call." And, and so he died a few years ago, but for the rest of his life, I could be typing along, writing a book, and go shoot an email to Robert and go, "She's in Alabama, in the middle part of Alabama, and she found a spear point." He typed back, "Madison Point, brown, about that big," And so he took my mother and me to look at Poverty Point and mounds in Mississippi. And as I've already told you, that really made my mother's year to get to do that. So he was a lovely man. And it was, as I said, the human connections, you can't always predict where they're going to come from.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I'm sure for you, and this was your first book that this happened with.
My first published book.
Yes, your first Fay Longchamp book too,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So when you started that series, were you when you started writing that story, did you think it was going to be a series?
I was so naive. I didn't know that I don't know, Mr. Reader's expected series, and I wasn't sure I could finish one. So why, I just was totally out of and so that process of the first book, it's like when he's standing in line, and it's like, oh my goodness, people will read this. You think about that. And so, and I wasn't sure I could finish that book. And so why would I think about the next book? But as I was finishing it, the publisher was asking me, did I see it as a series? Would I like to write another? And I had an idea for another one. I'd been doing a lot of reading about archaeology, and I'd found a topic I thought was interesting. And so I said, yeah, sure. So I wrote the second one. And as I was and also, when when you're writing the first one, you go, I'm never going to finish this. I don't know who I think I'm fooling. Never, never, never going to finish it. And then when you finish it, you're thinking, well, I'll never have another idea. Never, and so then it comes. And so at the end of the second book, the idea for the third book came, and that's about when I started to trust the process. I really believe in the power of the subconscious for artists, and I do think that while the front of your brain is making the book, the back of your brain is looking at possibilities. And then as things ease up and you're finishing the project, that lets the new project surface. And so that is how it has always worked for me.
Mhm. So what's interesting about that is you did not develop your protagonist in the beginning to have this continuing story. And is it 13 books later in that
Yeah,
series?
13.
13 books later, she's still here, she's still going strong. And so you write the first book, right? And then you were like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to continue her story in a different setting or whatever. She progressively has to change. So, and you weren't expecting to do that. And so tell us about how she has evolved over 13 books. And by the way, what is that time frame between the first published Fay Longchamp to the 13th?
In real time or
Right.
fate?
Yeah. We'll start in Fay time. We'll start in Fay time. So what is the
Originally I was aging her in real time. She started out 34 because I wanted her to have gone to college, had to drop out for money problems, have had to struggle. And so she's 34 without a lot of money or prospects or family. She's alone. And so I was aging her in real time, so that would be a year or two per book, which I found very creatively satisfying because she's not static. She dates men who are wrong for her. She finds the right man. She goes back to school. She gets a PhD. She starts a business. And that I found that more creatively satisfying and other people have done it different ways. Sue Grafton aged Kinsey Millhone two months per book, which slowed her down. I saw Sue speaking before she died, and she said that at some point she started writing historicals because the world was getting ahead of Kinsey. So I was doing it in real time. And then I decided that she was getting old, so I didn't want her to get too old to do the physical whatever. So in her early 40s, I slowed her down, and it would be more like 2 or 3 months per book for the last several books. So probably for Faye, less than 10 years passed in those 13 books. But in real time, the first one came out in 2003, and the most recent one came out in about 2018. So we lived about 15 years while she lived 10.
Wow. And so a lot of things happened to her, which you've touched on a few of them. She starts out single. Yeah, and dating, and then but she eventually settles down and has a family. And
yeah, I asked my agent and my editor when I married her off, and am I making a mistake? And they both said, well, you don't want to keep writing the same book. And I said, no. And then people go, oh, is the series over? That was only the fourth, fifth book, and is the series over? And I'm going, well, your life doesn't end when you get married, And so, she had a very rich married life, and she had a baby. They adopted a teenager. Her husband has a life and develops, and things happen with him.
Mhm.
And her husband has a father that he's estranged from, and he mends those bridges. And
Mhm.
I feel very privileged to have written 13 books that each has a mystery that stands alone, but there's this overarching arch of her life.
Mhm.
That was great. She's a wonderful character. I've enjoyed her.
So even though the mysteries are standalone, because of the character arc, do you recommend, like, let's start at the beginning and follow her through?
I always write them so you don't have to start at the beginning, because I hate the idea, or like me, we've already had the conversation with somebody can't get artifacts.
Yeah.
It's lovely to start with artifacts and read them in order, but I don't think you have to. There's always, with any series, there's that, will somebody still alive in the later book? So that tells you a little bit about,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
other than that, I think they stand alone well. And I did that on purpose because,
Mhm.
you're not in control of the distribution of your work. And so people need
Mhm.
to be able to enjoy it as they get it.
And also, someone may discover the book, or or the character, the storyline in the middle of the series unknowingly, and they're reading it, and that's what happened with me with Karen Slaughter and her Grant County series. I picked up a book, it sounded interesting, I read it, and I said, I feel like maybe there's more to that, you know what I mean? And I was like on the third book unknowingly, and so I went back and read to catch up. So that can happen too. And the book was fine without me having the first two books, but just something made me think as I was reading it, like, I think I'm missing something. I think I'm missing some history, and that's what made me go back and
I've had
look into it. So, but that's the nice thing about writing a standalone is a mystery within a series is that maybe you can just read it whenever. But like you said, there might be clues in the
Yeah.
latter books that tell you something about the earlier books.
Yeah,
So,
I don't think any of them out and out spoil, but
mhm.
you might not be as worried that somebody's going to die, they're in book 8.
Right.
Although people would always say, "You didn't kill Joe, did you?" And I'm going, "People would slaughter me if I killed you."
Oh, okay. So one of the things about Faye Longchamp as well is that she travels.
Mhm.
So her books are not always in the same setting. And so does Mariana Evans travel?
As much as I can, I'm
Mhm.
not like Faye, but I do. And this is another thing I tell writers is that you can't always go to the site of your book. If if you've got his book set in the Arctic, probably can't go. But if you can get there on a tank of gas and a night in a Motel 6, if it's in your budget, it always helps the book to go there.
Mhm.
So I've generally been to the places that you read in the books. But Faye, when I started to write the second book, I wanted to send her to rural Alabama. The first book was set on an island off the coast of Florida where Faye lives. And my editor at the time said, "Are you sure you want to do that? People love that island." And I said, "How many dead bodies is she going to stumble on that little island?"
Cabot Cove syndrome, right?
Exactly. So I wanted to establish early. I didn't want to do 3 books on the island and then move off. And archaeologists do travel. And I had met Robert, the archaeologist, by that time. And so I had done this historical research. I knew where I wanted to set it, what the mystery would be, all who the people would be. And he said, "That's all real nice, but who's going to pay her to go do archaeology there? There has to be a reason that she gets funding or a business reason for somebody to hire her." And that was excellent advice for the rest of the series. Is that every time I sat down and go, "Oh, I want to send her to New York," I had to have a reason for her to go, and that made sense in the real world. And so I gave her the business. She has a consulting archaeology business in the later books, which helped a lot. There had to be a reason to hire her firm, but also she worked enough with law enforcement in her home county that there were times when I was able to justify her involvement because there was an archaeological mysteries centered on an archaeological site, and they hired her as a consultant. We found this thing, we don't know what it is. And so it's basically an amateur sleuth series, but there are aspects at times of police procedurals because she's working for the police.
And so what are some of the places where she has gone?
Was the island where she lives and where 3 of the books are set is off the coast of Florida in the big the Panhandle, south of Tallahassee. There was the one in rural Alabama. The third one was in Mississippi because it took me that long to figure out how to write something where they would still let me come home. And there was one. There was a post-Katrina book in New Orleans. There
Oh,
was
yeah.
that one was fun. There's one in St. Augustine, which I was living in Florida at the time, so I could actually wake up one morning and go, I need to go look at it and drive over there. That was a fun book to write.
Mhm.
There's one in upstate New York at the birthplace of spiritualism, was a lot, which has a long history. That was fun. There's a crystal ball on the front of that book.
Oh.
There's one in there are 2 in Oklahoma, one in rural Oklahoma and one in Oklahoma City. And there's one in Memphis. So and then there's one south of New Orleans in the very mouth of the Mississippi that's set in the weeks after the Deepwater Horizon blew up, while people were waiting for the oil to wash ashore. I worked offshore when I was a undergrad engineering student one summer, and so had spent some time down there. And then I went back, as I said, with a tank of gas. I went and stayed in a friend's fishing shack and did some research down there right after the oil spill. So that one was fun too.
So let's talk about her island home real quick.
All right.
And is this a fictional island?
Oh yeah. I needed it to do what it did, so I had to create one with my parameters. It had to be big enough to have that you could have a well. Had to have surface water and a well because it needed to have supported agriculture in the past. And some of the islands off of the coast of the Panhandle do have surface water. So I would do that kind of research. I would go, is it plausible? And then so there's a chain of islands off the coast of Florida, and I just added one. And then actually on her island is actually very close. So there's a chain of islands. The one that I added at the end is an archaeological site where she worked. And then the island where she actually lives is up very close to the swampy coastline. And so then after I wrote that book, the publisher says, well, we need a map. I'm going, it's not real. So we had to be very creative with how to draw a map and place it on the real map of Florida.
Right.
And also I didn't quite know how big it needed to be to support agriculture. So it hangs off the side of the map and it's as big as you want it to be.
That's right. So our imagination can take us
That's right.
for the rest of it. And if I'm recalling the story correctly, this is like she owns the island, or it's her family. It was her family's, and she's inherited it, the whole thing.
The whole thing and the dilapidated plantation house. Faye is descended from the slaves who built the house and from the people who lived in the house. And so she has this internal conflict about how would you hate the house? How would you feel about it? I decided that she would be very proud of what they were able to do under terrible, terrible situation. And also as someone who is an archaeologist and devoted to history, she would have that relationship to the house and the island. And so she has nothing but the house and not the money even to pay the taxes. And so her problem, I always tell people when they're plotting a book, you have to know what your character's problem is. And her problem is that she's devoted to this place and she's about to lose it.
And initially that was your story, right? Like, because you weren't thinking you were going to continue her. So you were creating, it sounds like a complex character with a complex history initially.
Yeah, I was very lucky that as it turned out, I created a character who could carry a number of books because she has a lot of things she wants to do, things she needs to work out. How does she feel about her personal history, about her family's history, about this place? How is she going to make her way in this world that is not friendly to her? Will she find someone to love when she has all these other problems? And will she find fulfilling work? And so she makes progress on all fronts in the first book, but nobody solves everything in one fell swoop. And so there's a lot of richness and a lot for her to do. And I've written several books since I wrote the most recent Faye book, but I left her in a good, happy place, but I could, in a way that I can go back to her at any time. She's very happy right now. I can go make her miserable again any day now. So it's been, she's very lucky. Sometimes you feel like your characters come to you, and I'm very lucky that she came to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think 13 books in a series is impressive, and it sounds like there's a potential for there to be more.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to spend too much time on Faye, despite the fact that she's fascinating. I could talk to you all day about her, but because you do have some other work that we want to talk about and more recent stuff. But just to stay with her a little bit longer, you mentioned Oklahoma.
Mhm.
So before we go to Oklahoma, what is it about these locations that you have selected for her to have work in? What drew you to those locations? You've mentioned a few real life scenarios that are like, oh, that, Katrina in New Orleans, that's a good, that'll dig up some bones. So what is it about some of these locations? And then let's go to Oklahoma from there.
Well, Faye's best friend and eventual husband is mostly Muskogee Creek, and he's from Oklahoma. And I set that up in the first book, which was published in 03. So I probably started writing it in 01. And I established in that book that he had a father there that he hadn't spoken to since he was 18 and left home, and he needed to call him. And books rocked along, and I had no reason for Joe to call his dad. And I set up in the 7th book that he was going to call him in the 8th book. And then I got a job in Oklahoma where I had never set foot in my life. So I wound up writing the Oklahoma book as I was preparing to go to Oklahoma. And so actually I wrote the book that set up the Oklahoma book as I was preparing to go to Oklahoma. And then when I got to Oklahoma, I wrote the book where he goes back to his home. And then I wrote another book set in Oklahoma later, because you don't patch up your relationship with your dad in one book. So his father gets a chance to make up for the things he did. And so I wound up loving his dad too. Joe is a really interesting character in that he's, I've had this conversation with other writers. They have to all be me. Where else would they have come from? But he is the least like me. He doesn't think like me. I think like a scientist, and he's very spiritual. He's he's in touch with nature. He has the learning disabilities the size of boulders, so he's not very bookish, although Faye helps him with those things. But he's the perfect complement for her. And he's the character that when I was a mom of young children and would go to sleep at my keyboard and come back and find out Joe had said things that I didn't remember he said. So Joe has been the yin to Faye's yang for all this time, and he's been a real gift.
And so the Oklahoma setting was actually just history of Joe's heritage, and you're like, oh yeah, that's where the family's from.
Yeah, because
And
there's the Muskogee Creek Nation is in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And so that it was sort of always meant to be. So, but then, so I've got Joe and Faye have a son. We meet Joe's dad. And then in my second Oklahoma book, we meet Joe's dad's distant cousin. And so at the end of that book, I've got, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4 man-tooth men in the same room, and their personalities are so big it almost bursts the room. And all, they just, I don't know where they come from, but they are very fulfilling to write these different characters.
And then to actually have a real life situation that takes you to Oklahoma, like you said, kismet, right? It's
Yeah, yeah.
serendipitous, is that the word?
Yeah, and then speaking of serendipity, I was I needed to talk to the Muskogee Creek, somewhat at the police department, about how they would investigate a particular crime, and they didn't have email addresses, and I was having an introverted moment and didn't want to pick up the phone, and I bleated on Facebook about this problem, and somebody popped up and said, well, my cousin, I'm Seminole, my cousin's Creek. We know somebody, we'll get you in touch. And they did. So I went over and met the assistant chief of the Muskogee Creek Nation and learned about the very interesting interactions between tribal, state, and federal government when it comes to crime. And that's just another one of those wonderful experiences you don't have it if you're not a writer. It's
Mhm.
part of the writing life I really love, even if I didn't want to pick up the phone.
All right, so let's transition. We've kind of put Faye to rest. She's, like you said, she's happy. Life is good for her right now. And you decided to move on, and I believe you've written 3 books since the last Faye. And so you started a new series.
I did.
Yeah.
And this time I knew I was starting a series from the first. And so I made her very young to give her lots of running space. And also the story needed her to be young. She's 21. And this is different in that they're historical. The Fae books all have historical basis because of the archaeology, but they're set more or less in the present day. And when I started writing them, I wanted to write a historical way back in 01, and my agent said, well, those aren't selling right now. Well, 20 years have gone by and now they are, popular. So the first Justine book was The Physicist's Daughter, and it was set in 1944 in New Orleans at a factory, and she's got like a Rosie the Riveter job. And also no money because it's always better for your characters to have problems. And but she's unique in that both of her parents were physicists, PhD physicists, working, publishing physicists, and even her mother, which was unusual but not unheard of at that time. And so they trained her to do what they brought her up to do what they did, and then they died when she was 17. And so she wasn't able to go to college, and she had to support herself. They died right at the end of the Depression. They didn't leave her any money. Who did in 1939? And so she's working this factory job, but she knows this stuff that nobody expects a woman to know in 1944. They don't expect her to have knowledge of physics. She's in a factory building. They're telling her she's building radio parts, and she knows she's not because she's built radios with her dad for fun. And she can weld. Her parents taught her to weld. And so she's being asked to repair broken equipment that shouldn't be broken, and she can tell that it was sabotaged. But she can't go to her boss and say, look, somebody's sabotaging our work, because her boss is lying to her every day about what she's making. She didn't trust anybody. She can't trust anybody. She can't trust even the police, because there were some pretty well-known instances of corruption in the New Orleans Police Department at about that time. So that's my character's problem, is that she knows that there's sabotage going on, that she's been lied to, that everybody around her is being lied to, and she has to figure out what to do about it. And so that was great fun. And to write, to read, and I don't know if any of you or any of the listeners have ever been to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, but that's why I said it there, because I went to the museum wondering why it was in New Orleans, not why not Washington, D.C., why not New York? And it's because that's where they built the boats for D-Day. Because there was a man who had a very tiny, like 75 employee boat company to use in the bayous, and he had invented a mounting for the engine where you could just drive your fishing boat right up onto the bank of the bayou, and he could see the military applications even before the war started, and he was already talking to the Navy And so by the time the war was well underway, he had like 25,000 employees building boats. He was a great inventor. He invented the boats. He invented a lifeboat, a wooden lifeboat that you could drop from an airplane and it would still float when it hit the water. They built airplanes, they built ships at several factories in New Orleans. And he was the first person in New Orleans to pay women and Black people the same salary paid white men. So it was very interesting to read the history. I corresponded with the archivist at the museum for World War II because there was a real secret project that I can't tell you about because it spoils the book. There was a real secret project that she was working on, and it was so secret that we don't know everything about it, but we know some things about it. And they never told the women who worked on it when they declassified the project. So right at because there are very few of them left. At the end of their life, some of them found out that they could talk. And so the archivist is even now hurriedly trying to put together the details of this secret project before the people die. And I found some things online that have been declassified that I think are related to the secret project. And so in 1944, I would have been shocked for reading these things that I can Google up online any day of the week now. And so I sent her links to those. It was a lot of fun because I get to do my history stuff. I get to do my physics stuff. And I love the character. And her best friend, Georgette, is a wonderful character. And Georgette is a country girl who, without a lot of educational opportunities, and she appreciates Justine for what she knows, and Justine appreciates her and helps her learn. And that's a wonderful. I love writing female relationships. So in the second book, the government has seen the potential in Justine and Georgette and have sent them to work among the code breakers in Washington, D.C., which you hear a lot about Bletchley Park, but we had our code breakers here, who many of them were women. And so in the second book in the Justine series, it's called The Traitor Beside Her, and she's been assigned to work amongst in a room full of code breakers, and we know that one of them is a traitor. And these are the best there are, and they can't use those people until they know who the traitor is. So she and Georgette are sent to find out who the traitor is. So that was fun. And then the third Faye book that just came out this summer, and that's the one I've got right here. It's called The Dark Library.
Yes.
And it is a standalone. It's in 1942, and it's set here in the Hudson Valley where I live now, in an imaginary town. And I'm very clear that it's an imaginary town because terrible things happen there. I don't want my new neighbors to think I'm writing about them. But it's sort of my love letter to the old Gothic stories of a brave, smart young woman in a terrible situation in a beautiful, crumbling old house. Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, Rebecca, that kind of thing. And this character she has a PhD in English literature, and she studies the Gothic stories. And that's she grew up in an apparently wealthy family with an abusive father and a remote mother, and she has left. She got out. She's teaching English high school in Boston. She's happy. She's 32. She gets a phone call that her father has had a stroke and her mother has disappeared, and she has to go home and get it and straighten things out. And she gets home to find out that there is no money and everything they ever told her was a lie.
Wow.
So that's and the secrets are in her father's rare book collection, The Dark Library. That's why it's called The Dark Library.
Well, how fun, because you're getting to bring your literature profession into a story.
Absolutely. It was so much fun to write this book.
So that is very interesting. If we look back over your books, like you have the archaeology, which was more of a hobby, fun thing that you did with your family when you were growing up. And then you have the physicist's daughter that is your engineering. background, and now you've segued into the literature part of your life too. So that's really cool. It's a full circle. Do you think you said it's a standalone, but is there a possibility that this could actually be a series continue?
Possible that I haven't seriously thought about it. I've got a proposal into the publisher for another standalone. But there's an opening. There's an opening. I could bring, her name is Estella, but she calls herself E. So E could come back. Yeah.
Okay. All
Mhm.
right, very cool. But what about Justine? Are we gonna see her again?
Justine, I have plans to go back to, because the last line of the trader beside her teases a very exciting location for the third.
Oh,
So
great.
can't spoil that, but Justine doesn't recognize the name, but modern readers will recognize the name.
Okay. All right. Very, very intriguing. Can't wait. Cannot wait. So believe it or not, we are already coming up on an hour, and I feel like we really just barely scratched the surface of getting to know you and getting to learn about your writing, which it's fascinating. How many years have you been writing, do you think?
Well, as my
Not professionally.
that's the
Yeah.
fourth grade.
Yeah. Not counting.
The first artifacts came out in 03.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I've been publishing since 03.
Yeah. And we didn't even talk about your getting published. You mentioned a little bit about the first book, Wounded Earth, and that there, there was a struggle and you ended up doing it yourself. But so what is your publishing path? Like how are you being published now?
Now, I was
Mhm.
traditional publishing through Source Books as my publisher now.
Mhm.
My first Artifacts was bought by Poison Pen.
Mm.
That's and the first 11, I think, Fae books were published by Poison Pen Press, who were bought by Source Books. And
Okay.
everything since then has been published by Source Books, although Source Books is now majority owned by Penguin Random House. So Penguin Random House, Source Books did the print books and the ebooks for the Dark Library, but Penguin Random House did the audio book. So it's sort of a hybrid situation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then I did self-publish Wounded Earth because I did always believe in that. So I've got Wounded Earth, a collection of my short stories, and a book on how to write novels. And then some
Yeah.
just single short stories out there that people can buy one at a time. So they're out there, but the bulk of my publishing fiction is through Source Books. And then I have the 2 Agatha Christie books, which
Mhm.
one is out through Bloomsbury, and the other one will be out through Bloomsbury.
And what is the name of the second one, the second Agatha Christie
They
that's coming out?
changed it. It's um Agatha Christie in the 20th century, rewriting female justice.
All right.
I've in my head for the last 7 years, it's been witness to the Agatha Christie, witness to the evolution, women justice in the 20th century. And so they've confused me.
It sounds fascinating. So as I said, we're getting close to the end of our hour. And one of the things that Sisters in Crime Atlanta has is a reader forum where once a month we get together by Zoom and we talk about books that it's called Murder by the Book. And we talk about books that we've read recently. We share about them and if we like them, and a little tidbit of what they were about. And the idea is to grow our to be read pile, and mine always does grow.
Yeah.
So I would love it if you could help us out by sharing something that you have perhaps read recently that you would recommend for us, and either you can do both. Something that you recommend as a professional writer, a favorite author, or a favorite book of all time that you think everyone should read this. So
I'm currently rereading a very good book because I'm going to be leading a reading group for the Center for Fiction. I do reading groups for the Center for Fiction online, so if people are interested in that, sign up for those. And I've got one coming up on Drive by James Salas, which was a movie starring Ryan Gosling. I forgot what year, like 2011. The book is about 20 years old, but it was published by Poison Pen Press because nobody else would publish a novella. I sat on a panel with my publisher, Robert Rosenwald, and James Salas, and they told the story where James said he just wrote this thing in a white hot fury, showed it to his agent, who said, "This is great, but I can't sell it." And then he told Rob about it, and he said, Rob said, "I'm sure it's great, but I can't publish it." And then he read it and they said, "Oh, you win. Okay, I'll publish it." And it was featured book in Entertainment Weekly. It got all the accolades. It sold to the movies. And the New York Times called it a perfect piece of neo-noir fiction. And it's about a nameless man who drives for the mob, and they call him Driver. But the brilliant part about the book is you never learn Driver's name, and the chapters are scrambled. So every time the chapter changes, you have to figure out where Driver is and how old he is and what the heck is going on. But that makes it possible for him to start the book when Driver's sitting in a motel room full of blood and dead people, and you have to skip through his life to find out how he got there. So
Okay.
brilliantly written. Salas is a published poet, so Drive.
Okay. And so it sounds like despite the coordination or the outlining, et cetera, it all still works. I guess
Yeah.
at the end, we're going to get to the solution.
Yeah, you
Okay.
start with the dead bodies, and then you come back to the dead bodies and see how it plays out. But yeah, I always admire creativity and point of view, and this one has it.
Yeah, oh, I love it. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being with us. I mean, we know that it's a Saturday. I'm not sure where the weather is like where you are. I see a beautiful sky outside your window, so it looks like it's a nice day.
It is.
And you could be doing anything today right now, and you chose to spend it with us, and we gratefully appreciate your time.
Oh, I appreciate being asked. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to reading The Dark Library, as well as getting to know Faye and Justine, even more so now. And that's the point of this program, as Lance alluded to in the beginning. He said, the goal is to get the books off the shelf and in the hands of the readers. And that's why we do this, so that our audience gets to know an author and hopefully is intrigued enough to say, I want to read that author. I want to know them on the page like I got to know them in the off the shelf program. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for hosting me. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And before we sign off, if Tanisha, our president, would like to walk us through any upcoming programs for Off the Shelf, I'd love to kick it over to her as sign off.
Before Tanisha comes on, just a reminder that the recording of this will be available on YouTube and on our website.
Yes. Thank you, Lance. And if not, I will go ahead and say that we are doing something a little different this month for our chapter meeting, which is normally the second Saturday of every month. And Tanisha just posted, I am always just a guest. Okay, Tanisha, I hear you. But this month in October, this coming month, I should say, we are doing the Decatur Book Festival, which is a live in-person event in downtown Decatur here in Georgia. So instead of our chapter meeting, which would be the second Saturday of the month, the Decatur Book Festival is the first weekend in October, and that will replace our meeting. So hopefully we do have some authors that are signed up to be there. under the Sisters in Crime Atlanta tent, and other authors, or just chapter members are welcome to come join and visit while they're perusing the festival. And again, that'll be next weekend, the first weekend of October, as opposed to our normal time, gathering date and time, which is the second weekend. And all information can be found on our website, sistersincrimeatlanta.com, and our Facebook page. And thank you guys so much. Oh, before I forget, next month, our off-the-shelf author is Dr. Catherine Ramsland. And she is she's written a ton of books, and she's typically a nonfiction writer. She's a psychologist, and she writes about true crime and serial killers, and she's a consultant, etc. But she's also started writing a fiction series, and it's a pretty clever name. It's called The Nutcracker Investigations. And so we're going to be chatting with her on October 25th here on the same VAT channel, off the shelf via Zoom. And you can get more information. You can get more information on that through our Facebook page and website. Also, we have a note here that Murder by the Book will be on its regular schedule, which is this coming Saturday, October 3rd, October 3rd, at 10 o'clock via Zoom. So if you're not going to the Decatur Book Festival and you want to join us for Murder by the Book and talk about what you've been reading, we will see you there. But anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Mariana.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay. This happened to me